whoever, perfect. And whoever, if anyone misses this, hopefully they can watch it. So thank you everyone for joining us. It's Thursday afternoon, and it's the founder and CEO of Mother Honestly Blessing. For those who don't know me, I see Eve in the waiting room. Eve is joining us shortly. I am the founder and CEO of Mother Honestly. I'm a mother of four. Background is in chemical engineering, Fortune 100 companies, running around, doing all the things. And now I am, I'm building Mother Honestly, and it's been an exciting journey. And hi Eve. Are you in Idaho?
I'm in Idaho.
You look like you're in Idaho living the life. So I am joined today by, if you're not talking, can we go on mute? I'm joined today by my wonderful friend, Eve Rodsky. I think Eve is tired of me by now because I'm like, Eve.
Never.
As well, Eve is the New York Times bestselling author of Fair Play, which is, I think it's a vocabulary that has stuck with so many of us. And Eve, I can't wait we were just talking about something that I think you'd be very excited to talk about. And it's something we're going to open up the ground for. But I also want to introduce Brian Anderson, Executive Director and founder of Fathering Together. And Brian is also a brand new author. I'm super excited. I can't wait to get my book, Brian. I'm like checking in with the mailman. And I love getting your updates about the process of the book and how you're naming the book. I think that's really amazing to follow that journey. So thank you so much, Brian, for all the amazing things you do for fathers across the country and around the globe. And Paul Barron is the founder of Daditude app. And I'll let him share more about it because I think it's absolutely unique. Because a lot of times we're heavily focused on mothers because mothers are the primary caregivers. But now that we have Fair Play and we want to bring fathers into the conversation, we want to make sure that when we are designing solutions, that it's designed with, with all parents, all caregivers in mind. So thank you so much, Brian, Paul, for the amazing work you do. So I'm going to open up I'll open up the conversation. And by the way, this is a very laid back, discussion. So please feel free to jump in. I know, a lot of time we do webinars and we have a Q&A session at the end, but I want us, if something comes to mind, please raise your hand in the chat section, and I'll be more than happy to call on you to share your thoughts, or if you have a response to anything, please feel free to use the chat feature. Tell us where you're joining in from, how many kids you have. Do you understand Fair Play? Is your partner involved? Are you supportive to your partner, or the other way around? So please share that with us. But Eve, I want to share with you, and I just sent the link out to everyone. And this is about Toby. So Toby is a father of 6. He just earned his PhD, and he has been promoted to CEO while having 6 kids. So Toby wants to tell us the secret to keeping it all under control. And he has this long list of, calendar, to-do list, messages, and, this physical inbox planning. And then, so this went on, it's like 6 or 7 threads. And then the very last thread is the why. And he said, well, my wife has given me an amazing family, and I can support her best by managing my time effectively. And that's the only time that Toby mentions his wife in this long thread of how he's been so successful, got promoted, got his PhD as a father of 6. What do you think about Toby?
Well, I think Toby reminds me a lot of many corporate CEOs, Blessing, that I've interviewed over 10 years. I started my research into Fair Play in 2011. So this is now 12 years. And the thing that scared me, actually, which was a Toby-like comment, was I kept hearing from, I'll give an example. A head of a tech company, or a head of a product line of a tech company, was talking to me because we're going to be on a panel together. He's the gender justice champion at this huge tech company that we all know and use every day. And he said to me, what he was most proud of was that he had 2 single mothers on his team. And he was really proud of this, that, you know, he was fostering their development. So then we started to talk, this is before the panel, in the panel prep, about his home structure. And I said, well, tell me about your home structure. And then he goes and says, well, thank God for my wife. You know, I could never do this job without her. You know, she does everything for our family, because obviously I'm in this very high stress job. And so I said, so do you know that what you just said to me is that the single mothers on your team can't do your job? And then it got really awkward and silent. And then we ended up not doing the panel together. So I think we have to be really careful about our implicit bias. When you believe that greedy work, as Claudia Golden calls it, is the only way to success, which in America, by the way, it is, I don't blame men for this, just like I don't blame women for taking on the mental load. This is just the structural systems that we've been dealt. But we're all here with Paul and Brian and Blessing to dismantle them. And so that's what I think about Toby. What I think about Toby is that he really genuinely believed he was a gender justice champion, but he implicitly told me that those women on his team couldn't do his job.
Absolutely. And that's what, you know, I think when I saw that, so Brian, I'll come to you because, you know, as from a male perspective, you know, how should, you know, his wife respond to this, right? Because we saw in a tweet that came afterwards where this same person said, you know, my wife is cleaning one of the kids' bedroom for the night time today. I don't know where she finds the energy. She's 37 weeks pregnant. So Brian, I just want to hear your thoughts, because you and I, you know, we've chatted about this a few times, but I want to hear your thoughts around Toby and, you know, how other men in today's society continue, how we are still having these issues, despite all that we know as a society.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to put words in Toby's wife's mouth or even Toby's mouth, because I don't want to get myself in trouble either. And I think, you know, it's fascinating to me, and a lot of what I'm learning through writing this book that's coming out in September. So September is when you'll get it, Blessing, I promise. It's actually due this week to the editor. So right after this, I'm jumping right back onto my laptop to finish it. But as I've reflected on my conversations with dads, so many of them have shared, they've always thought about being a dad, but they never put any energy into it, right? Like little girls, they're taught to play house, they're taught to play with dolls. Little boys, I'm from the 80s, I had G.I. Joes, I had Legos. Sometimes my G.I. Joes would be the little kids of Barbie. Most of the times I would not play with my little sister. And I would say I'm pretty typical, right? This is a pretty typical experience of young boys in America, that we are taught to play war, we're taught to be leaders, we're taught to take charge, and we're not taught to think about all of the infrastructure that goes into that care and that space. I never thought about it until high school, how much my mom and dad sacrificed their careers, their time to get me to my Little League games, to get me to gymnastics. In high school, though, I was in musicals. My dad would show up and build the sets for the musicals at my high school. And that's when it started sinking in, like, oh, right, other people are building this for me. And so then, like, you know, 15 years later, I'm 30 years old, getting married, talking about kids. And I'm like, oh, right, I got to do all this other work that I've never been taught to do before, never think about before. And so my book had one direction in mind, and it's really in these final stages shifting to more of like, how can we help dads build a mindset around the minutia of life, right? The daily grind that Eve so wonderfully created through Fair Play. But there's a step before that, and that's what I think is really dawning on me these last few months, is how do we get dads to realize that pre-work, right? Like the mindset shift of, well, I'm going to do Fair Play to help my wife, I'm going to do Fair Play because of all these other reasons. They're all external motivators, but how do we shift that to an internal motivation where, as Eve has said, and I've kind of adapted to my own, like, how do we get dads to realize time in the boardroom is great, it's important, but being there to know the dentist's name and be there in the doctor's office with your kid has so much more profound implications, not just for your child's health, but ultimately for your health. I mean, there's so much research out now because of the pandemic that so many dads are opening up and saying, I don't want to just go back to a normal 9 to 5 where I commute an hour and I'm gone for 10 hours a day. And my dad time is like 5:30 to 7:30 and that's it, right? Then it becomes a job. It's part of my job description to be dad, rather than the innate understanding that my goal in life is to raise an amazing child, and all of my other stuff needs to funnel towards that. And I think Toby is just the perfect example of, I was set as a child to be the CEO. I was told by my parents, I'm going to be a leader and I'm going to change the world, without realizing the relationships around him is really what changes the world, not some amazing to-do list that you check off by the end of the day. Anyway, I'll shut up. I'm starting to get also boxy.
Thank you. No, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's great perspective. And I'm going to go to Paul, because Paul and I, we've talked about this before in terms of just resentment, right? I remember when this is my second marriage, and my first marriage, I was just very resentful because I felt like a lot of the responsibilities were on me. It was on me to cook, to clean, to do the drop off and pick up. And it was always my schedule, oh, we didn't, we would simply be having a conversation, right? To say, oh, well, we didn't really, he could even tell me like, I don't like this dentist, or I don't like this doctor. Instead of him fixing that, it's still me. Like, I found the first doctor, but now I have to find the second doctor because you didn't like that doctor. So there's a lot of resentment that, that we're seeing. We see that even within the Mother Honesty community, when a lot of women come into our DMs confiding in us that, it is absolute trash. This is, this marriage is going to blazes. We are not happy. We feel like we've been cheated. We feel like, we've been lied to. This is not what I thought my life would be. So we're getting a lot of these things. And so it begs the question, what can we do about it? What can men do about, how can we help together ourselves, women and men? How can we resolve this resentment so that we can, again, have that big reset, right? Before we even get to fair play, we sort of need to address, the resentment that has built up already.
Yes, over the last few months, since we started talking about that big reset and resentment, it's become extremely clear on social media, looking at the comments that I see posted. There's a lot of resentment on the mother side, and I'd say almost equally on our app, the Daditude app. Inside the community, there are a lot of messages shared by dads, because it's a community for dads, and they're also sharing a sort of resentment. It's from a different point of view, because it's from the dad's point of view, but it's as valid. And it's you can feel that it's really running deep, and they're hurt, and the resentment is here on both sides, and it seems like no one knows where to start to operate that big reset, or at least start making the first move, or maybe mothers do, and maybe dads are ignoring, or vice versa, depending on the families. But regardless, it seems that right now we're still in a phase where a lot of the dads that we hear on Daditude are sort of camping in their position, and kind of wondering, okay, sure, but how about me? So right now there's a lot of me, and very little of us, and I feel like, yes, the challenge is to bring them all to the start line. I'll just give a quick illustration of this, and I think I don't claim to have the any of the deep solutions, but I definitely have some hints to share. But I'm on the PTA WhatsApp group for my son's school, 700 families. There are about 300 members on that PTA group on WhatsApp, and what I see is that it's overwhelmingly mothers. Maybe not a huge surprise there, but I'd say it's almost like 95% mothers. And the few times when I've raised the issue that, you know, there are just too few dads who show up at events to help organize, you know, sell the drinks at the athletics event or whatnot. Well, the reaction is I'm getting comments from mothers saying, well, dad.
I think we lost your audio, Paul. Yeah. I think we lost your audio.
How are we doing here?
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, much better, much better.
I'm back. And so some of the comments that I'm reading from the mothers are you know, about, well, the dads are not on this group, and you know, they're not even at the start line, in a way. They're not even at the start line, and I think we, you know, I'm like, well, so why don't you, you know, go and see your husband and just, or invite him through WhatsApp to the group? But then it's one more task for the mother to like get the dad involved. And I think at the very beginning of the school year, you know, dads are just not even joining these groups for various reasons. You know, some of the comments I hear is, oh, there are too many messages to read, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, at the end of the day, somebody's reading them. Somebody has to read them. And why not you? Like, has this been discussed? Or is that like an implicit, you know, decision that you took as the dad in the family, that, you know, usually this is my wife doing this, or like I don't, you know, I can't follow these threads, they're too long, so I'll just let my wife do it. Is that even discussed? Or, and I think that you know, often we're inside this cycle of just assuming that if I don't do it, somebody else will pick it up. But that somebody else is indeed, you know, that last line at in Toby's post, it's definitely his wife.
Absolutely.
Well, unless they have, you know, AIDS at home or something, but it's his wife.
Well, it doesn't look like it, because the wife is still the one cleaning at 37 weeks pregnant. So Eve, that brings me to you, because Paul said something that stood out to me, which is, you know, that even when it's clear that we need to bring men to the table, it seems like we are protecting men's time. It seems like we're saying, you know what, he's not available. I'm gonna have to do this, right? Can you share with us, you know, based on your research and the work that you do at Fair Play, you know, why is it that women are protecting men's time?
I think we're in a system, which is, this was my usual suspects moment. I don't know if you remember that movie. It's like Kaiser Soze at the end. You figure out who he is because you look at the board of clues and it's all so obvious. The real issue here is not really about who left a sponge in the sink, or in Toby's case, who's cleaning the house, or as Paul said, even who's on the PTA. What the real issue here is that as a society, we don't value men's time the same. That's it. We treat and value men's time as if it's finite, like diamonds. And we view and value women's time as if it's infinite, like sand. And so the way that, and that happens since birth. So since birth, women get messaging. We see it everywhere. If women enter a male profession, salaries automatically come down. We're told that breastfeeding is free, right? When it's 1,800 hours a year of our time. But the hardest part, I'd say, where I don't think it's a men's, again, it's not an individual issue around men. And that's why I'm so happy Joel is here, and men who have new babies, because the whole point of what works is when you to end bias in any context, we know for the past 50 years, you have to change assumptions for structured decision-making. That's what you have to do. If you're making decisions based on assumptions, there's going to be bias there. So what happens is that women internalize the assumptions that their time is not valuable. And you hear it in 4 ways. You hear it in 1, my husband makes more money than me in hetero cisgender marriages, or my job is more flexible. That's why I'm sitting on the PTA, not my partner. The problem with that is women always say their job is more flexible. We see in studies, if they're the doctor and their husband's a lawyer, they say their job's more flexible. If you flip it, they still say their job is more flexible. Number 2, women say to themselves, and the time it takes me to tell him, her, they what to do, which is what Paul was echoing, I should do it myself. That's a classic devaluing of your future time. The 3rd way it comes up is women will say, I'm a better multitasker. I'm somehow wired differently for care. Or they will say, yeah, we're both colorectal surgeons, but Paul is better at focusing on one task at a time and I can find the time. But look, people, right? We're not Albert Einstein. We can't fuck with the space-time continuum. There's no way to find time. It's just different expectations over how you use your time. And so one of the hardest days of my journey in fair play was sitting down with a neuroscientist, because my toxic message to myself was I was a better multitasker. I see things Seth doesn't, somehow I'm wired differently because of the way I grew up or because of my gender, whatever. And I remember, and Blessing knows this, I sat down with this top neuroscientist and I'm all eagerly taking notes about 10 years ago. Are women better multitaskers? And he looks at me and he says, well, how do you want me to answer that question? Culturally or from a neuroscience perspective? And I said, well, I'm here for the neuroscience perspective. And he said, no, there's no gender difference in the brain for what's called task switching. He said, however, imagine, Eve, that we men could convince you women that you're better at wiping asses and doing dishes or serving on the PTA. How great for my time. I get my golf game back. I get to have tenure. And I don't even have to ask you because you think you're better at doing it. So that was a hard day for me. He was obviously saying that facetiously, but I did cry in his office that day because it was like the whole world of what I thought, Blessing, was falling apart before my eyes. And to rebuild what Paul and Brian are doing, that mindset shift, it's very, very triggering because it requires looking at ourselves and our assumptions. And it's really, 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 it's painful. It's painful to do this work.
Oh, you're saying all the things that, of course, this is why I love fair play, because it's so research based, it's so data driven, and we're not just this isn't about assumptions. This isn't about playing into a cultural context. It's about saying let's really apples to apples comparison here, right? Are we biologically different? Is that what this is? And if the answer is no, then why are we allowing this to happen? So let me come to you, Paul O'Brien. Either one of you can take this question, because what I hear from Eve is that, it almost seems like if a man is successful, we shouldn't expect that they do housework or that they support their spouse. And we are seeing, right? This is something that I grapple with as a person. And for those that know, I am in Lagos, Nigeria, right? And I'm in a society where women do majority of the domestic work, and men are just expected to be the provider. And so now we are in a situation where women are working, women are entrepreneurs, they are business leaders, they are in the workplace, and we are still seeing the same gender norms. And so the question is, why is it that when men are successful, it almost seems like we shouldn't even bother asking the question? And so here are some of the things that I see. And I know we're talking about the big reset, but in order for us to reset, we really need to put a lot of things in. We need to acknowledge the status quo. So what we're seeing is men saying, well, if you can't get it done because you're also working, you can just outsource it, right? But what I find, even as somebody who now outsource, is that the mental load is still on me. Like it even takes more out of me to manage someone, to be like, oh, have you cleaned? Have you, cooked? Or have you done X, Y, and Z? So it's still not balanced. It's still not fair. So, so the first question is, why is it that when men are successful, it's even harder to have this conversation? And you, if you all remember, there was an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal where even I talked about this, to the point where, when we ask moms, why aren't you bringing it up? They tell us that, well, it almost signals that we don't have faith in a relationship, or that we are not happy that they are being, that they are successful. So please just share with us, from your perspective, why is this happening? And what do we need to change? What do men need to change in order for us to achieve this big reset?
I'll go first because I know Paul wants me to go first. Two things. One is, how are we defining success, right? Like if success is just a dollar sign in your bank account, then sure, great. You've got a 6-figure income, or you made $1 million in sales this year. Congratulations. But if you don't know your kid's doctor's name, as Eve loves to point out, if you don't have the time to spend the weekend with your kid, or as I like to ask dads, why does your child have the best friend that they have? Not what's your kid's best friend. That's like rote memorization from elementary school. Anybody can say 2 + 2. If you don't know why 2 + 2 = 4, then you've lost it, right? And if I don't know why my kid's best friend is my next door neighbor's kid, then I'm not doing the work of building a relationship with my child. I'm just checking off boxes. And so I think one is redefining what success looks like. And I've never been one to chase money. I'm a bleeding heart communist in some respects and community organizer. And so obviously I lead with relationships. I'll just put that out there. But my board president is is an economist, and we have great fun debates over time and how much we give value to time for some and not to others. And diamonds or not, we value business in America, right? And we value the time that produces something for the social good. But if we don't also see that the social good, and we've had many conversations, you and I and Eve and others, around the infrastructure, not just being roads and bridges, but the care economy, right? And so if we keep ignoring the infrastructure that holds the fabric of our community together socially, emotionally, then the success of how many dollars you have is going to crumble. And I think, this is a tangent, but I think that's partially why we're seeing cryptocurrency failing. That's why we're seeing a lot of the social structures that were built by men that look like me, minus the beard, not having staying power, right? And yet when we see social systems like religions, like community organizations that build from a relationship-minded, interpersonal connectedness, we see those last the test of time, because there are ways to manage that and reinterpret that, etc. I'm also a minister, so I have a very ministerial perspective, not a data-driven like Eve. So I think that's another reason I kind of look at things a little differently. But yeah, I think it's the how we're defining success and how are we looking at the infrastructure of care rather than just the hard bridges that exist. And just to kind of go back, Andrea asked a question of like, how do workplaces get men to do this, right? To show up for this care. For me, it's not how do we get men to bring their skills from the home into the work. It's really how are we getting men to translate those skills back into the home. Because if we're going to keep seeing men as the financial breadwinning providers, and we're pouring tons of money into men to grow into strong leaders in the workplace, we also need to have a level of how do you then translate it into the home? Not that your kids are your employees or your wife is your employee or partner or whomever, but how are you using your team leadership skills to see your family as a team that you're all working towards the same conflict on? How are you using those emotional intelligence skills that you learned to help your staff grow and achieve amazing things in the office? To how are you using those emotional intelligence skills to help your kids manage a meltdown, or the kid that keeps bullying your kid, how do you use those skills to not go off and yell at the other kid or the kid's parents, but find a healthy solution? And so again, I think it's those pieces that we're not addressing succinctly or thoroughly in our community. Paul, how about you? I'll pass it off. And you're muted.
The headphones were nice. I wanted to go back first on what Eve had been talking about, the multitasking. And it reminds me that a lot of the things that we do at work are about multitasking. I think we're all amazing multitaskers at work. And why is it that magically when we step into the home, or when it's related to home, you know, one of the parents becomes really, really bad at multitasking, and suddenly it's really difficult, and oh, I can't wrap my head around it, and oh, I'm exhausted, and you know, I think there's a lot of, I mean, the work environment is a tough environment, and in many ways, the home environment is treacherous, but you know, it's a very friendly. It's supposed to be a very friendly environment, likely much more friendly than the work environment. And we learn all these skills throughout our, youth and early adulthood to become great multitaskers and great team players at the office, because it's all about, keeping it all together and keeping these projects moving and building these things together. And it's a mirror of what families can essentially do together at home. And yet, once we arrive at home, it feels like, both parents can be absolutely exhausted after a day at work, and or because of different types of pressures, both societal or because of specific projects, or and suddenly we become the worst collaborators. And from a couple, we become sort of like not even enemies, but it can become quite. Oh, what's happening? Hello. And so it can become quite difficult, and so I think that whenever we feel like we it's just too difficult at home, or we can't do it, I think it's very good for everyone to remember that we already know how to do this. We already know how to do this at work, and we can also activate it at home. And sure, when you feel really tired, exhausted, mentally, physically, after a hard day at work, things are going to be a little bit more difficult, but you already have those skills and you can still activate it. The fact that you decide to switch them off, and I'm using deciding to switch them off, on purpose, because I think that there are a lot of men who decide when they get home that, they've done enough and that the rest needs to sort of be done for them, and they may not know otherwise. And I wonder whether many of these challenges could be improved by just deciding to keep that switch on for a bit longer, or maybe it's a slightly different direction of switch. It's still on, but at a different angle. I don't know, but nothing automatically, multitasking doesn't automatically switches off when you get home. And I think that touches upon the word of honesty.
Right.
And by no means I want to say that some of us are dishonest, but I would accept that if somebody challenged us men or me regarding dishonesty. Are you dishonest about the fact that you claim you can't do more at home? Are you dishonest about the fact that you claim you cannot follow that WhatsApp group, which is a very simple example. It's not, but it's not very representative, but still, I think dishonesty is something that should be addressed, and it may not be, willingly done this way, And it may be a strong word, but we're talking about operating a big reset and resentment. And so I feel like dishonesty or honesty is a fair word to put on the table.
I love that. And it reminds me of a word that Eve uses that is now one of my favorite word, which is, are you being considered? Does your partner consider you? Because I remember when I was pregnant with my fourth child, and I used to be I was always giving the kids a bath, and I was like, I was giving the kids a bath one day, and my husband came and was like, no way are you going to be doing this while pregnant. So from that day onwards, it was the one giving the kids a bath. And there was one thing I found, which is that my husband is actually perfect at bathing the kids. I mean, he is a germaphobe. The bathtub 30 minutes before bath time is wiped down with,
Wow.
with disinfecting wipes. He cleans everything. He has a special bucket. And he doesn't, I just throw all kids in the bathtub and I'm like, you're out. Right. And he actually takes his time, gets under their nails, their hairs, is very, very, it takes more, it's a more detailed step, right? Which is, if you're so great, it's very detailed oriented at work. And I could see that translate even, at home. And so, it goes back to what Eve says, which is, could it be that we are, as a result of this society, the way men are being brought up, could it be that, men are losing their opportunity for connection and empathy and, their connection to humanity by completely dissociating from supporting on the home front? But I want to ask Eve this question, and you can dig into this. But one of the things that I have seen, and Eve touched on this too, what do we see as the reason why men are not embracing considering their partner supporting on the home front? Could it be that when a man takes up more responsibilities at home, that, sort of they may be worried or scared that, hey, my wife took on more responsibilities at home and look at our career, right? Look at where she is now. What have we seen in terms of data to show us that when men do more at home, they are more successful, or that it doesn't affect their success, right? Because we've seen that it affects a woman's success. So I just want to throw that out there. But I know, Eve, you've been doing some work there.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's even a new study that just came out to show that men really, really get a good, nice, we know there's a fatherhood bonus, but it's been confirmed again, that when men do things with their families, it is still considered a bonus. And we have a Fair Play documentary coming out on July 8th. And one of my favorite scenes that our director, Jennifer Newsom, decided to put in is from the movie 9 to 5, when I guess Lily Tomlin, she says, I think that's her name, you gave the promotion to this other guy, he's 5 years less senior than me. And he says, well, he has a family to support. And she has a full family to support too, right? But it doesn't, a lot of women are still looked at as secondary earners, as people who, is how nice it is that you have money. You want to buy those high heels and an extra dress. Women, what happened to us as a society was that the stay-at-home mom is dead, right? The stay-at-home mom has been killed. She's in the ground. We've buried her because of income inequality. We're not where Brian is as communist yet. So we are in a place where the stay-at-home mom is completely, she's dead, she's buried, but her very strong, scary ghost haunts us to this day, because what has really happened is we have not accepted women in the workplace. We know they have to be there, but attitudes are that 62% of Americans still believe there should be one person in the home. And we do everything from schools, 9 to 2:30, PTAs based on the unpaid labor of women. Our entire society is built on the backs of the unpaid labor of women. And so to dismantle that system is really not any one man's individual responsibility. And so that's why I really do love men. Fair play is a love letter to men, because what ends up happening in this system is that even though it's really horrific for women and we're getting very sick, actually physically sick from doing all this, men have another problem, which is that they don't know their role. So there's just no understanding. From one side, you're hearing you have to be an ideal worker in a chair 15 hours a week. From their partners, or from me in society, you know, or in a panel, they're hearing that they have to be, they have to show up with ownership in their home. And then when they try to do that, oftentimes their partners reject them and they say, well, you can't help because I'm not doing anything right. So I want to tell just a really quick story about how small the fair play changes are, but how profound I think they can be. I don't know if I've told you the story, Blessing. Maybe you've heard it, but this was during the pandemic. It was during the pandemic, and I'll call them Brian and Amy. Just I use Brian here. So I don't have to say their real names, that they have not given me permission to tell the story, but they started to sort of adopt the concepts of fair play during the pandemic because things were not working for them. They were in a dual income household. It was a complete shit show. And so one of the way the fair play system works is it's just a metaphor, right? So it's just cards. It's a discussion tool where you decide who's holding what card. And when you hold that card, the two most important things are you do it from start to finish, as Paul would say, like you do it at work. The things we're good at work. You don't walk into your boss's office and say, hey, what should I be doing today? I'll just wait here till you tell me what to do. So you do it for the way you would at work. And also you carry through your mistake. That's basically the only premise. It's not rocket science, but it's so hard because of these structural systems. So, but the most important thing is not you just go, you do this, I do that. It's what we were saying earlier about the values alignments. I think, Andrea, thank you for saying that in the chat. That you get values alignment about what does dishes mean to you? Does that mean you pile them up and do them once a week? Does that mean you do them every day? People are not used to having conversations about dishes. So then assumptions just come in. What do weekend meals look like for us? For me, it looks like McDonald's literally every meal. I'm like number one customer at McDonald's, to the point where the woman said, do you want to get the app? You're here a lot. So to my husband, it's, you know, a green is not a shamrock in a Lucky Charms box. So anyway, so what does that mean? So this couple decides that they're going to keep one of the cards is magical beings. Santa, Tooth Fairy. They decide to keep it in their deck. They don't throw it out. Some things are thrown out of their deck. They keep that in because they decide it matters to them. They really want their child to experience the Tooth Fairy. They had both experienced a Tooth Fairy growing up. So Brian decides to take on the Tooth Fairy, the magical beings card, with an ownership mindset. So what he reports back to me is that the first time it's his responsibility, his daughter loses her tooth, he forgets to put the dollar under the pillow. So he said in the old dynamics of their home, what would have happened were twofold. His wife would have said, I told you you can't do anything. You're the worst father. You've ruined our child's magic. I'll never let you do anything again, right? So all or nothing thinking. And he said, not only would Amy have said that, but he would have blamed Amy for not reminding him to put the dollar under the pillow. That was their dynamic. Post fair play, he says, and this is the big change, he owned the card in advance. So he actually apologized to Amy. That's all she needed to hear. He said, I fucked up. I made a mistake. And so that de-escalated things because he took responsibility for that card. He wasn't blaming her for not reminding him. It was his ownership. So she said, okay, I'll give you the space to carry through the mistake. So he tells me he emails toothfairy@gmail.com just for fun with his daughter, saying, what the hell happened to you last night? And the daughter's watching and he gets a response. How crazy is that? So there's an actual person out there. Thank you, toothfairy@gmail.com, for doing unpaid labor for us. She responds and says, I'm so sorry. I'm backlogged with a supply chain of teeth. There's a lot of stuff going on during COVID. And so he explains the supply chain issues. And then he says, Well, what Tooth Fairy is saying is that when she comes late, she brings double the money. And that's it. Now his daughter, he says, asks, is the Tooth Fairy coming on time or is she gonna be late so I can get double the money? But it's such a different dynamic. I love that story so much because they told it with such sincerity, and it's such a profound change in their dynamics and their mindset, back to what Brian was saying. But it's hard to articulate because it sounds so small. And that's really what we're looking for here, Blessing. As you know, we're looking for fighting. Blessing and I and Brian and Paul will bring you in. We're fighting for you on the systemic issues. I take Brian with me everywhere. We were in DC last week, and Blessing and I do everything together. We are fighting for you on the systemic issues. So our ask to you is to do your part in structured decision-making in your home. So you're cultural warriors with us.
Absolutely. And Amy said something in the chat, because I didn't finish my story after BC started giving the bath, right? Because I love when you said we need to do our parts. Because it used to be that I thought that my husband couldn't do these things. And then even when we, when he started doing the bath, I realized how much better he is at doing this. And, there was a day I walked in and the entire bathtub had transformed, right? Because now BC is thinking, he's excited about this project, right? So he has gone on Amazon.com. There's a new bath mat, which I never got, but he's thought about safety. He got some, squiggy things, some ABCs that went around the bathtubs. So now he has a lot of accessories to keep the kids excited about bath. And these are things that I would never think about. And nowadays, like, bath time is now, they now sing, and it's much more exciting for the kids. And it used to be that we would have to like beg the kids to go up to take their bath. And now they're like running up with daddy to take a bath. So it just, it's Eve, what you talk about, which is, we're robbing men of their humanity by letting them actually get away with, with not doing anything on the home front, right? And so we need to do our part, because in my mind, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, my son is going to remember that, daddy gives me a bath, and we, that was where I learned, how to sing, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, right? He's going to remember all the amazing times that, yes, it's work, right, to actually do all these things with the kids, but it's also a part of the journey. It's a part of the story of, of your humanity or their humanity that is now there, right? That wouldn't have been there if this particular bath time didn't happen. So,
and by the way, people we know as humans, we don't value things we get for free. And so it's this idea that, if you get what you put in. And I think for men, this idea of like earning your child's respect and trust, it takes work. And I will say that it is I've never, in all my years now, where I ask men about not just their fair play journey, but their time with their kids, there's not one man who has ever said, I regret doing the Tooth Fairy, or I regret transporting my kid to school, or I regretted, cleaning up their vomit even. I've never heard that, because as we're all saying here, it becomes our humanity. And so when we can elevate chores and housework, and a good way to do this, and again, this is a free resource on the Fair Play Life website, but if you're not ready to divide up because it's a whole system, and we don't want you to use the cards wrong by throwing them and saying, okay, take, meals, I'll never speak to you again. But one way that a lot of people I've seen, especially millennials, have been using this card tool is that they are telling each other their stories. So I'll practice. Okay, let's practice. So Brian, I'm just gonna shuffle, and then I'm gonna stop, and then tell me when to stop.
Stop.
Okay, let's see what we get at. Okay. Oh, Jesus, I just dropped them all. Okay, let's do that again. Sorry. All right. Sorry. All right, let's do it again. Ready? Go.
All right. Stop.
Okay.
We could grab something. Yeah.
Here we go. Okay. So meals on the weekends. So I want to know, just again, in 1 minute, 2 minutes, not what you do now, but in your childhood, what do you remember about how you ate together and on the weekends? Tell me anything you remember about a weekend. Who was in your household? What do you remember about weekend meals?
Yeah, weekends were always crazy because we had sports and other activities, but Sunday night dinner was always, my dad made Sunday night dinner. He actually made most meals, but he would always make Sunday night dinner. And my mom would always clean. It was like he did the pre-dinner stuff and then she did the post-dinner stuff. And then my sister and I were expected, to set the table so that we could all eat together. And yeah, that's the short answer.
And what do you remember anything he cooked? Do you remember anything that was gross or your favorite thing that they would make?
I mean, we were not very wealthy in the early years, so it was a lot of mac and cheese and fish sticks. As they got advanced in their careers and incomes, we had we'd have a steak every once in a while, or we'd have these fancy chicken meals. And then obviously once I started getting to high school, I love cooking. So I would start to take on some of the meal preparations with my dad. It was kind of a bonding time for the two of us. But they were always a little bit more elaborate on Sunday. Saturday was like throw a burrito take it out of the freezer and heat it up. Right. Yeah.
But what I love about that is I feel like already that was 45 seconds, that even if I did this as a teammate, I know Brian a lot better. I know about his Sunday dinner ritual. And also I would now know and predict that you may want to recreate that ritual, or you may not want to recreate the ritual if it was stressful for you to sit there. So that starts to seep into what you do as an adult. And if you don't explain where that came from, your partner may dismiss, oh, well, we don't need to sit down Sunday nights. It's just not that big of a deal. It's too crazy. I'm too stressed out for the Mondays. I want to go get some work done. But they wouldn't know why you were coming from the position of wanting to do that. So a lot of people are using this tool just to tell stories of their childhood, because we bring so much baggage to these issues that don't get addressed, because this is not one area that society values. So we have workplace coaches now. Even my Aunt Marion's Mahjong group has more clearly defined expectations in the home, right? You don't bring snack twice to that group, you're out. But the home, we don't talk about any of this. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the beauty, if we want to know where to start. And I'll say that to Joel, who was here earlier, start by telling your stories. Use this as a tool every night. Just take 4 minutes to sit down with a high cognition, low emotion conversation and just say, who is the calendar keeper in your home? Did you have a car growing up? What did that car look like? Did you have access to dry cleaning? Were you the one who took off the plastic and the wrappers, or maybe you didn't have it? So it just becomes really fun.
I love that. I love that a lot. Thank you, Eve. So I wanna go to Paul, because I think, I love the Daditude app, and a lot of time, because one of the things that I have to sit through is really hearing from moms, over and over again about, the unpaid labor that they do at home and the stress of combining that with work, right? But I also know that, we're starting to see some men, a few men, we're starting to see them, support on the home front, like my husband. And we are also realizing that it doesn't even matter. It's hard to combine work and family, period. And so, I love what Daditude is doing. Can you share a little bit about how Daditude is supporting men in this journey, especially men that are, participating on the home front, and so now they also need that support, in managing work, family, their mental health, because one of the things that we're starting to see is that we've built there's a lot of us, right? There's a lot of Blessing and Eve that are like, we got to support moms, and there's less of, we got to support dad, which is why we love, you and Brian. But can you share a little bit of how Daditude is supporting men at home and in the workplace?
Sure. I think, society is not really taught many men how to become a parent. And when they do become parents, They may not have a role model. They may not have someone to get inspiration from. They may not know what kind of dad they want to become. And it's a very parenting starts as a quite overwhelming period. And so Daditude is two things. It's a community, but it's also a series of self-coaching guides that dads can use to learn about a variety of subjects related to parenting and self-awareness and self-care, and sort of get some hints as to how they could slowly create this image of the parent they want to become, and how they could become more confident as a parent and as a partner. So we're offering a safe space for dads to do just that, to exchange with other dads and to feel like dads, because oftentimes, men are often asked to be workers, and there are very few spaces where men can be viewed or feel like they're just parent or dads. So we try to create that space inside Daditude. So there's a community space where they can exchange on any kind of subject, ask questions, get support. We try to prime this community with a question on a weekly basis that changes, where we ask them, how they're feeling about this subject or about that subject. Sometimes it's related to their kids, sometimes it's related to their partner, sometimes it's related to themselves. And we try to make it lighthearted, but in a way, it gives them a space to express themselves, because somebody is actually caring about them as a dad. And so we prompt them to answer on various subjects. Recently, it was, what do you wish your partner told you more often? We also had a more funny one, which was, what's a pointless argument you recently had with your partner? And it's not a joke. It's really about how to share a little bit of your life in your own words, and to see what other dads are sharing in a very safe space where you can slowly start developing the vocabulary that as a man you may not have to express emotions and to express your life as a parent. Because I think that a lot of men just sometimes have difficulties engaging with their family or expressing themselves because they just don't know what the words are. They lack practice because this is not something that we teach men. So that's part of the community. That's the entrance point. And then once you feel a little bit more confident, and maybe you feel like you have a little bit more room to dig a little bit deeper into various subjects around parenting as a man, then we offer a collection of very short self-guided coaching guides that were developed with parenting professionals, academic researchers, and dad organizations such as Father Together. Thank you, Brian. And this is where they can, spend a little bit more time. And these guides are written for dads. Mm-hmm. We're showing specifically the word dad, and that's also why the app is called Daditude. I think a lot of men feel completely invisibilized, and when they come to Daditude, it makes them feel like there's finally a little space for them. Actually, we've tested a number of ads on social media, and the one that constantly gets the best, click rate is the one that says "finally an app for dads." That's that's how bad things are in a way in terms of support for dads. And I think our mission, at least as Daditude, is to slowly bring dads up to speed and try to slowly bring them to the start line. I feel like sometimes we're not competing with with mothers or with parent number two on the same in the same league. And a lot of the content that is out there for parents is written often for mothers by mothers, and it may say parent in big, but what we've learned through our research is that dads don't identify with that word and are usually not seeing themselves represented in any of these articles. And that's a huge issue, because then who do they turn to? What do they turn to?
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. I mean, I love the work and the, all the amazing things that Daditude does. And I think we just dropped it in the chat. So there's a dad check-in. There's also a mom check-in. So thank you to Daditude app. They created that for Mother Honestly, where our moms are checking in weekly. We've seen it's actually been very cathartic, if you will, because some of the questions forces you to think about how your week is going, and how you're showing up as a mother and as a parent, and even how you're taking care of your personal self. So please click on the link if you're a mom. If you're a dad, click on the dad check-in. It's a great tool. I just use it to vent now, Paul.
It's great. It feels great, right? Because it's supposed to be just a few questions it takes only a few minutes, and people are really good at leaving very short answers. And I think that it's a great way to start the week. It's a little bit of a self-reflection. And we know from what options, because a lot of the answers are there's multi-choice answers. We make it as easy as possible. And we see that the number one wish or a good thing happening that week is to patch things up with a partner and get things a little bit more stable and more enjoyable. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. Brian, please just share with us what Fathering Together does. Tell us about your new book. Tell us about, how we can get started with our partners in really parenting together. And I know you responded to a question in the chat about, parenting out loud in the workplace. So if you can share that as well as we close out the webinar.
Yeah. We're 4 years old. We got started as a Facebook group and just called Dads with Daughters that my friend and I created for ourselves. And as more and more dads joined, we're now the largest dads group, if not second largest. We kind of go back and forth with another dad group, but which we're friends with. So many dads were joining saying, I want to be this great dad. I want to be this amazing person for my wife, my child, my family, whatever. But I don't know how. And so we quickly realized there are plenty of resources. As Paul was saying, there's so many resources. They're just not getting funneled into these dads' hands. And so we created Fathering Together as a nonprofit to really be that resource, to gather, or to be a funnel for all these resources, I should say. And through that process, realized too, there's a lot of nonprofits that exist. There's a lot of programs that exist for dads who are low economic status, who are coming out of prisons, who have all of these quote unquote social ills. But there's so little for corporate leaders, for dads who have all the success, as we talked about earlier, but don't have that emotional connection. And so currently what we're doing is through the Fatherhood Insider that you posted there, it's kind of like a corporate dad group where every Tuesday I just have an open conversation, kind of like a dad check-in, where we have a different theme talking about paid parental leave, what we did for Father's Day, what we can do for our companies, what we can do here or there, and really leaning into the privilege that we have in our society to exact change and really turn dads into agents for positive change, rather than just throwing our hands up and saying, well, this is just how it is. I guess I got to prepare my kids for it. Instead saying, hey, I can actually make the world a little bit better so that my daughter can grow up and be a corporate leader, be the president, be whatever. And then, of course, we do other resource development like we gave to Paul. And this fall, we're actually working with a number of dads in our network to launch school-based in-person dad groups as sort of like a support system to the PTA, PTO system we have, that while they are for all parents, 90% tend to be mom-driven. So how do we get more dads invested in the preschool and early childhood education spaces so that as the kids grow up, their dads are just default parents in those spaces, and thus engaging dads in that emotional connection, like we talked about earlier, but also shifting schools' mindsets to not thinking, oh, well, I'm going to call the mom for every emergency because dads are showing up. I live 2 blocks from my kid's school and I work from home. My wife is a physical therapist in the city. She can't run back if my kid needs a new pair of pants, like I've had to run to school to deliver, or socks that got wet because they were running through the snow. And so how do we get dads more invested early on, and that kind of systemic change that needs to take place?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of mindsets that needs to change as well. My daughter was held at school for 8 hours because they had called me and I didn't pick up. And as a result, they couldn't call the father because, we got to protect this man's time. So she was held literally hostage for 8 hours because I didn't pick up. So, a lot of it is, how do we also change our mindsets, even as women, right? And so Eve, maybe you can close us out, because one of the questions that I want to ask you is, where do we start? I know we've talked about, talking about whether it's the dishes or the meals, but in order to really, move the needle, what are some of the concrete steps? Is it, having this routine discussions, which I know you wanted to get into there earlier. So what are some of the, top 3 things you can do right now? Low hanging fruit, doesn't require any money. Top 3 things we can do to achieve this reset at home.
Yeah, I would just ask for one, because I saw in our data the difference. It's the check-in. And this is for all family structures. If you're a single parent with your kids, if you're in LGBTQIA family, same thing. We need to start having high cognition, low emotion conversations on a consistent basis about the idea that we both, if you're in a relationship, we both have a third full-time job, which is running a house is a full-time job. And so if you're not checking in consistently, then you're going to default to assumptions. That's just what happens. And so what I would say, the only advice I have that to me is life-changing, because I see it in all the couples for 10 years, is when you I'll give you an example. I asked 1,000 people on social media vague questions. Sometimes I like doing that because I don't want to tip my hand for where I'm going. And so I said, what is your most important practice? And so some people didn't understand the question, but a lot of people came back and said exercise or meditation. Your most important practice is communication. And when you start to look at communication as relational and not transactional, it changes everything. I'd say 99% of people still say to me, I talked to Blessing because I had to tell her to get on the Zoom, or I talked to Brian to give him feedback around his book or whatever. That's a transactional way of looking at it. If I start to look at my communication, I say, I'm talking to Blessing to get better at talking to Blessing. I talk to Blessing to get better at talking to Blessing. That's the transactional nature of communication. If you show up believing that you're not there just to tell somebody something, but you're there to learn how to be better at communicating with that person.
I love that. I love that so much. And I think it was at the beginning of Fair Play when you said, having these conversations when emotion is, low and cognition is high. That was the part that stuck with me the most, because a lot of times, you only want to communicate when something has gone wrong, right?
Feedback in the moment is fun to do, but it's toxic. And I will say that even this morning, my daughter was sort of having a meltdown because I took away her iPad or something. And she's like, I'm going to rip up Cinderella, because Cinderella is a picture she made for me. And I was like, and so it was starting to escalate. And then my 10-year-old sort of walks over and he says, this is a high emotion, low cognition conversation, Mom.
Oh, they're learning from you.
So Ben at 10 is like, this conversation not going to go well. Like, you need to communicate with Adam when her emotions are coming down. He's like, walk away, take a break. So I will say that that's the worst advice we've ever been given. And I think in the history of society is this don't go to bed angry advice. of course you go to bed angry. Because you do not want to be having conversations when you feel like the emotions are escalating. No feedback in the moment.
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you everyone so much for taking the time. This has been amazing. In order to achieve the big reset, we need to lead with communication. We need to check in. We need to be aware of where we are. We need to find the right community. It sounds like, fair play, mother honestly, tools, community resources available to you as a mother, parent, caregiver. And then of course we have Fathering Together, as well as Daditude app, which is a fantastic organization and resource for dads and all parents, if you will. So we'll be sharing that with everyone who registered for this event. We'll share all the tools with you in an email. But thank you, Eve, for always just being so supportive of the Mother Honestly community. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Paul. This is amazing. We've always wanted to just have a quarterly series about dad. So this is a great first one. So we will definitely do it again. And we want everyone to please bring your partner. We want to see more men on our screens. So the challenge is the next one, which will be in 3 months. I want to see your partners in here. Let's have a well-rounded conversation
together on the same screen.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, we don't want to keep talking to ourselves. The solution lies in doing it together. So so thank you all for taking the time. See you next time.
Bye, Blessing. We'll talk soon about the conference.
Yes, we will.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye all.